Okay, let's dive in. We've got some uh, really fascinating source material today.
Yeah. What's it about?
It really digs into the national narrative of Turkey, specifically this, long-held belief about where modern Turkish people came from.
Ah, okay. You mean the Central Asia origin story.
Exactly. The story taught for ages is that ancestors arrived from Central Asia, mostly after the Battle of Manzikert, 1071.
Right, 1071. That date is sort of etched into the traditional history, isn't it?
Totally. It's seen as this pivotal moment.
When Turkic groups really started establishing a foothold in Anatolia, yeah, a cornerstone of that narrative.
But here's the thing. Our source kind of throws a wrench into that.
Oh, how so?
It suggests that modern science, especially DNA evidence, tells a much more complex story,
Yeah,
not just a straightforward migration.
interesting. So genetics challenging the established history.
Pretty much. And what's really compelling is how the source uses this to illustrate the whole process of nation building, how these stories get constructed.
And why they get constructed, right? The purpose behind them.
Exactly. So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to unpack all that.
Okay.
We want to understand why that origin story became so central to Turkish identity.
Makes sense.
Then look at what the genetic evidence, according to this source material, actually says.
Right, the scientific angle.
And finally, tackle the big question. Why do these powerful myths stick around, even when science might contradict them?
That's a huge question. So the source material itself lays all this out.
Yeah, it's essentially a script exploring these exact points. It's our guide today.
Great. Where should we start?
All right, let's jump right in with the historical context. The source really emphasizes the role of myths in building a nation.
Yeah, this is absolutely key. You have to think about the time period. Early 20th century.
Right after the Ottoman Empire collapsed.
Precisely. A vast multi-ethnic empire gone. Suddenly, this new Republic of Turkey needs to create, well, coherence, loyalty.
Like, all these diverse groups, that must have been a massive challenge.
Huge. And that's where the need for a unifying story comes in. A powerful one.
And the source points to figures like the Young Turk nationalists and later Ataturk.
Yes, they were instrumental in crafting this specific narrative. It wasn't accidental, it was quite deliberate.
So what was the story they crafted?
It linked modern Turks to these figures from Central Asia, framed as mighty conquerors,
The warrior image.
Right. Nobility, warriors, nomadic peoples, sweeping into Anatolia, founding the nation. It's a very romantic, powerful image.
But the source is clear this wasn't just about history lessons.
Not at all. It was a tool, a strategic tool of power.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you promote this idea of a shared, noble Turkic ancestry.
Everyone's connected.
Exactly. It aims to bind people together, build loyalty to the new state, and, crucially, it could also serve to suppress dissent or separate identities among minority groups.
By saying, we're all fundamentally the same origin.
Kind of. The focus, as the source puts it, was really on unity, or at least the appearance of unity. Historical accuracy wasn't the top priority.
Okay, that explains the why behind the myth. Now, the source also hits on something that keeps it going, confusing language and genetics.
Ah, yes. This is such a common mix-up, isn't it? People hear linguistic connections and assume direct biological links.
Happens everywhere.
But it's especially relevant here. People see similarities between, say, Turkish and Kazakh.
And assume they're genetically close cousins because the languages are related.
Basically, yes. The Turkic language family is vast, right? Turkey, Kazakhstan, even parts of Siberia. These languages definitely share common roots. That shows historical connections, language spread.
But as the source clarifies, speaking a related language doesn't automatically mean you share the same core DNA profile.
Exactly. Shared language points to cultural or linguistic transmission. It doesn't necessarily mean a huge wave of people came in and replaced everyone else genetically.
Which the genetic studies seem to confirm, right?
That's what the source argues. The genetics paint a very different picture.
Okay, let's get into that. What does the genetic evidence reveal, according to the source? This is where it really challenges that traditional story.
Right. So modern genetics uses tools like Y-DNA haplogroups.
Tracing the male line back.
Yeah, like a genetic surname passed down through fathers. It helps map ancient population movements, ancestry.
Okay, so what did they find for Anatolian Turks? Give us the headline number.
Well, this is where it gets pretty surprising. The studies highlighted in the source, they suggest only about 5% of Anatolian Turks' Y-DNA actually comes from Central Asia.
Wait, hang on, only 5%?
5%.
That seems tiny, especially compared to a narrative of mass migration and conquest.
It really is. And the contrast is stark. The data shows the vast majority, the source puts it around 45% traces back to West Asia.
West Asia, so like the region itself, Anatolia, the Near East.
Exactly. Indigenous roots within the broader region. Plus, you see smaller but still significant contributions from Europe and the Mediterranean.
Okay, that's the male line. What about the female line, the maternal ancestry?
Mitochondrial DNA, which tracks that line, shows even less Central Asian influence than the Y DNA does.
Wow. So putting it all together, male and female lines, what's the source's interpretation? It's not population replacement then?
No, not according to this interpretation. The source argues the genetic profile points strongly towards cultural and linguistic transmission. Meaning it suggests that Turkic-speaking groups, maybe relatively small elites or waves of migrants over time, moved into Anatolia.
And mixed with the people already there.
Exactly. They interacted with and largely assimilated into a population that was already established, predominantly West Asian in genetic origin. The language and culture spread effectively, but the underlying gene pool of the region remained largely local.
It completely flips the script, doesn't it? From conquerors replaced everyone to a culture and language were adopted by the existing people?
It's a fundamentally different model, assimilation rather than replacement.
Okay, so we have the historical reasons for the myth, the political utility, and now genetic evidence presented in the source that suggests a story of assimilation. Which brings us to that core puzzle. Why does the Central Asian origin myth still hold so much power if the science, as presented here, points elsewhere?
Yeah, the source digs into several key reasons. They're powerful and kind of interwoven. The first one, pure emotional appeal.
Oh, I can see that immediately. Descending from mighty conquerors, sweeping across continents. Yeah. It's exciting, right?
It absolutely is. It's human. Stories of glorious ancestors, founding nations, big conquests, they offer a strong sense of collective pride, drama, purpose.
Much more appealing than, say, gradual mixing over centuries.
Right. The source calls that the more mundane reality of gradual cultural assimilation.
Okay.
One's an epic film, the other's a slow documentary. The epic usually wins hearts.
Makes sense. But it's not just feelings, is it? There are systems involved.
Definitely. That's the second major factor the source highlights, institutional embedding.
Meaning it's taught everywhere.
Pretty much. This traditional narrative is woven deep into the nation's institutions. Think schools, textbooks, state media. For generations, this has been the story.
The official history.
Yes. It becomes the default historical truth people grow up with. And the source notes, even in academic circles, challenging these official histories can be difficult. It might face resistance, even be framed as unpatriotic sometimes.
So it's reinforced constantly. And the third reason, politics again.
It comes back to politics. This is crucial and very much alive. National myths are incredibly potent political tools.
How are they used now?
They can be mobilized to rally support, build internal cohesion, and, as we touched on, potentially suppress minority identities or dissent by emphasizing the single shared origin as the basis for true national belonging.
So it defines who's in based on this historical narrative.
In a way, yes. The source points out that especially when nationalism is on the rise, appeals to ethnic purity or shared ancestry resonate strongly with some people, even if those appeals clash with scientific findings or a more complex history.
So emotion, institutions, and politics all working together. That's a powerful combination, keeping the traditional story dominant, even against contradictory evidence like the genetics discussed.
A very powerful combination.
Given all that, how does the source suggest moving forward? Can national pride and scientific accuracy coexist here?
The source really stresses the importance of critical thinking, especially in education.
Teaching kids differently.
Teaching people to understand the different layers, linguistic ancestry, cultural ancestry, genetic ancestry. They're related, but not the same thing. They don't always line up perfectly.
To acknowledging the complexity.
Exactly. And maybe instead of pushing one simple story, embracing the richness.
How so?
Advocating for more nuanced histories, ones that celebrate the diversity of influences that actually shaped modern Turkey, seeing it less as a single monolithic lineage.
Or more as a rich tapestry of cultures.
Precisely. A tapestry woven over millennia with threads from many different sources, including the significant Turkic cultural and linguistic influence, but also the deep Anatolian, West Asian, Mediterranean, and European roots revealed by genetics.
That sounds, well, more complex, definitely, but maybe more accurate and inclusive, too.
That seems to be the source's perspective, that embracing complexity doesn't have to diminish identity, it can enrich it.
So ultimately, the takeaway from the source is about this tension, isn't it?
Yeah, myths shape identity, powerfully so. But science and critical history challenge those myths, and that forces a reflection.
A reflection on the stories nations tell about themselves and why they tell them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive based on our source material, we've really explored that core tension.
Yeah, the established narrative. Turkish origins mainly from Central Asia, 1071 as the key moment.
Versus the picture painted by modern genetic science, as presented here, which points much more strongly to deep West Asian roots.
With the Turkic influence being more about cultural and linguistic assimilation over time, rather than mass population replacement.
And we really dug into those reasons the source gives for why the original myth persists.
That powerful emotional draw, the deep institutional roots, and its ongoing political usefulness.
Right. Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty provocative thought to chew on, I think.
Which is?
Just how do societies, any society, really reconcile these deeply held, powerful national stories, the ones that give unity and identity?
With challenging evidence, whether it's from science like genetics or new historical research.
Exactly. What is that relationship between collective identity, the history we choose to remember and tell, and what science might reveal about populations and their incredibly complex pasts?
It really makes you think about the sheer power of narrative, doesn't it? How stories shape who we believe we are.
Absolutely. And the value, maybe even the necessity, of examining those narratives critically, using all the tools we have, science, history, critical thinking.